introduce you to Patrick Attallah, Chief Data Officer of NXP.
Thank you.
Please sit down at the fire.
Wow.
Are you inspired by the previous talks?
Yes.
Good.
Good.
So we will discuss ethical AI, and you are Chief Data Officer at NXP, but you also have an extensive background at other companies. So maybe as a start, could you shortly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm the Chief Data Officer at NXP since 18 months, and I'm in charge of the whole data strategy, AI, and data governance. And as well, in fact, I lead with another leader of the organization the whole digital transformation journey for the organization, because as you can imagine, data is embedded fully into kind of like digital, and therefore digital transformation is important. Prior to NXP, I was for more than 8 years in a similar role at DSM, which is more a life science organization, and which in fact has as well transformed to going from ingredients to using in fact data science to kind of like have personalized nutrition or precision nutrition, which in fact is all about recommendation engine and kind of like understanding more about the data and algorithm and how in fact you kind of like develop that and make a business out of it. And apart from that, I'm passionate about digital and data and AI, and I've been kind of like doing digital transformation and data transformation for more than 15 years now.
Good. Well, then I think you are at the right spot here on stage.
I hope so. I'll be able to kind of like answer your questions. You're not easy.
Yeah, let's see. So the setting is as follows. I will first ask a couple of questions to Patrick, but we will definitely have some room for some more questions from the audience. So bear in mind that that's definitely possible in the end of the discussion. Maybe to kickstart on NXP, could you give an example of how AI is being transformed in NXP, or how is AI transforming NXP?
Well, I think that in fact is AI is transforming NXP at 2 levels. You have in fact first is the whole product component. In fact, we have heard from Guido earlier on from Accenture that in fact is all the high tech and any kind of like company today is trying kind of like to go and embed AI either in their products, and the second aspect is in our company. So in fact, how kind of like we kind of like do better in customer experience, customer satisfaction, customer intimacy, how kind of like do better in terms of the supply chain, in manufacturing, and therefore bringing in fact operational efficiency or growth in fact with the organization. So there's in fact 2 levels. And what I take care of is mainly in the second level, where in fact is R&D and our business line in fact take care of the actual how they embed AI and ML into our kind of like products.
Clear, thanks. So indeed interesting to see those 2 different aspects. Also, the talks that we had in the morning are merely about product improvement with AI, and the discussion we had also as preparation is how to also transform an organization.
Yes.
So I have a background at Philips, so I also recognized a couple of the things that we discussed. Yeah. So I'm very curious also, how is your team organized if you think about AI transformation and then specifically the ethical aspects?
Yeah, I think that what we have done from AI governance is that we have applied AI governance at 3 levels of the organization, which I think for me is kind of like very important, kind of like hearing from Mikey before and the question from the room, is basically first you have to start at the corporate level, then you kind of like go to the domain level, then you go to the use case level. And therefore on the corporate level is that, this is kind of like very important, is that we have put together an AI advisory council, which in fact I chair. It's kind of like as a delegation from our ExCo, and the role of the AI Advisory Council is to go and monitor, assess, and approve AI and Gen AI use cases, which in fact is very important. And I have to say, in fact, we have set up that back in December of last year, and the learning curve were very, very steep, not in fact for the technical people that are coming from data or from IT or from the CISO, but most important in fact is for RP and legal people, that they have in fact to go and catch up. What is in fact is a Gen AI platform versus an LLM? What does it mean in fact is it fine-tuning versus a RAG? All these in fact is all new things that you have to understand. So that's in fact is on the corporate level is to want to have in fact the right governance, the right in fact committee, and the right process for you to be able to kind of like make sure that in fact you are protecting, especially in semiconductor, IP is the heart of what we do. So that means we have to make sure that in fact there is no IP leakage, there is no data leakage, and therefore understanding the data input and the data output, which in fact most people kind of like think of the input, but forget in fact the output. And the output is kind of like, this is where the danger, this is where in fact is that you lose value from the organization. So the AI Advisory Council is the first thing. And the second thing we have done on the corporate level is to bring awareness and training. And we have done that through community of practice. So we have, in fact, 3 levels. So we have community of practice, which, in fact, are for professionals, like data scientists, data engineers, where we make sure that, in fact, they can share the active use cases so they can learn from each other, but at the same time is bringing externals to kind of like show us how RAG is being done, how fine-tuning is being done, and therefore to understand the best practice moving forward. So not about training only and certification, but understanding. And we have a GenAI community, which is today is about 600 employees that are broader audience. So those, in fact, are not for professionals, for Mr. Everyone, for people as well to understand what, in fact, it takes to do GenAI. And most important, what we kind of like is focus is the critical thinking. Because more and more, kind of like, you put the prompt, you have response, you copy-paste, and you use it. And people, in fact, don't use anymore, in fact, the critical thinking. The same as what we do in our cars with the GPS. You take your car, you put, in fact, the address, and you move. You don't even think where you're going. You just follow the GPS. Well, it took us some time to arrive there. And here we have to take that time as well within our organization, kind of like to make sure that people understand what does it take to use, in fact, this type of technology moving forward. So the second level is domain level. And the domain is either sales and marketing, manufacturing, supply chain. And therefore, on that domain level as well, we have monthly and quarterly reviews of all the different use cases that they have selected, that they have prioritized, that have, in fact, have been assessed in terms of risk level, with, in fact, very high, high, medium, or low. And therefore, based on that, we look at risks and value and make sure that, in fact, is we educate as well the actual SVPs and VPs of these actual kind of like domains to understand where the risk is, and not only looking at the value, because most, in fact, our leaders are, show me the money, and therefore they understand, in fact, where the money is, but the money could be kind of like, is very, very bad. And I always give this example, like Max Verstappen could be great, he could be #1, but behind him probably there's, in fact, is 3 kind of like crashes. Okay, great, but the performance is good, but the behavior is bad. So in AI, it's the same thing, as we have heard from Mikey. Performance is good, but how you get to that is kind of like very important. And therefore, there's, in fact, some guardrails that you have to go and follow. And that, in fact, is very important kind of like to have in the domain. The last level is on the use case level. And this is where, in fact, my team is helping the use case owner or product owners of the squads to kind of like have built in by design the AI governance. And therefore, the Canva that we have, in fact, with Mikey, I was taking, in fact, pictures because I have developed the same thing 2 years ago. That was actual, for me, is the 101, because it helps people to understand what are you doing, what is it for, and what is, in fact, the process. And again, input and output, and making sure that, in fact, is that the data that you select are, in fact, the right data. And we all know that data quality in many companies, in all companies, sucks, which, in fact, makes, in fact, my life miserable. But that's, in fact, is why, in fact, I have this role, thank God. So this, in fact, is that we do, in fact, from an AI governance at a 3 level, corporate, domain, and use case level.
So many questions. We only have limited time, right? Let me see, because I think the different levels are very clear. What I'm wondering is if you look to resources, how many resources do you then in NXP have on more a corporate level, and how many of those good practices, but also the community of practices are more on a domain level?
Well, I mean, it's just like the resources, my team is about 30 or 35 people, but it's not about, in fact, the size of the team. I think that, in fact, if you need to do transform an organization that kind of like going to be AI-driven and Gen AI-driven tomorrow or insight-driven, and I was kind of like going to ask, Guido, is that, in fact, is we're moving more and more into kind of like autonomous enterprise, and therefore we're going to go and let, in fact, many of the actual machine to take decisions for us for kind of like, basic, in fact, processes. And therefore, you need to bring all the organization. So if you are 33,000 employees, I think every employee needs kind of like to go and have AI and Gen AI embedded in them in their day-to-day tasks. Because I think that it was Satya Nadella that has said is that the companies that, it's not kind of like, if you learn AI, you keep your job. It's not, in fact, is that using AI. You need to learn AI for you to go and keep your job. So that is not only using AI. Using AI, in fact, you can still lose your job. However, in fact, if you keep AI, if you learn AI, that's, in fact, what, in fact, will keep you. And that's, in fact, what we need to bring to the organization. So we have, I don't know, in IT, about 500 or 600 people. We have, in fact, in data, as I said, 35 people in my team. But in each domain, we have at least about 30 or 40 people who are the subject matter expert, and we try to put, in fact, what we call first line of defense, second line of defense, and third line of defense. And the first line of defense is these actual AI champions that you have in the domains that understand not only the AI, Gen AI, responsible AI, but as well the subject matter expertise of that domain, and that, in fact, is important.
Good, thanks. And you rightly saying that there are a lot of people nowadays using AI. It's not only a tool of data scientists anymore or just the innovation team. It's everywhere. And what we also learned today, and what we of course talk about a lot, is that ethical AI is very important. So we need to make sure that it's explainable, think about the bias that's in the data. How do you then make sure that every employee of NXP knows about this, but on the same hand is not losing the innovation possibilities? So you see, what is the balance between guardrails and innovation?
I think that, it's interesting because, it's the same topic as sustainability. We should see, in fact, is Gen AI and the EU AI Act or any regulations, like in fact GDPR, as an opportunity, not in fact as a risk and something negative. And therefore today, for example, we build chips that are sustainable. A few months ago, we had, in fact, Tim Cook, in fact, in our headquarters, which, in fact, is in the iWatch. We have, in fact, is in an NXP watch. And why? Because this, in fact, we have make sure that, in fact, our products have the lowest carbon footprint. So to make that happen, you need to be able to have sustainability. You need to have, in fact, those type of program. And the same, in fact, for innovation. For you to be able to innovate, you can innovate greatly, but within guardrails. Before AI and Gen AI, every company in this actual region have innovated within guardrails. Why? It's because, in fact, IP is still the heart of innovation that, in fact, you patent. Unless we change a model of patenting, that's a different kind of like topic and different subject, but it's still kind of like the heart of what, in fact, organizations are. And I think that Philips have lots of patents that they have, in fact, sold in the past, which, in fact, is what made, in fact, the richness of Philips in the past. And we see, in fact, many companies today in this actual region that, in fact, came from those, in fact, patents, from those creation and innovation. So I think that Gen AI, what we kind of like provide for our innovation and our engineers is a clean room, and therefore where they have guardrails, where they kind of like continue to innovate, they can continue to test, but in fact we can make sure that, in fact, they cannot access to IP or confidential or third-party confidential information, and therefore where they kind of like can train a model or they can train an LLM for them, in fact, to be able to use it. So these guardrails are here to go and protect them, protect the company, and at the same time, that in fact is not limiting them, in fact, to go and create. The same as you have to go and you use, for example, personal information. You can do anonymization, pseudonymization, or data masking. You still kind of like get the results of that model without, in fact, knowing that it is kind of like Patrick or Imke or whoever else. But you kind of like still have, in fact, the outcome of it. So there's, in fact, many ways for you where you continue your innovation, but without, in fact, putting at risks either the actual people or employees' information or, in fact, your IP in terms of the organization.
So basically you say having guardrails gives people the freedom to operate within their expertise.
Yes, if you kind of like, put them, in fact, in the right kind of like, framework and where you have security. Cybersecurity is becoming very, very important as well. Mm-hmm. So you have to make sure that, in fact, is that all that is being secured. So there's no leakage, not only from IP, but in fact is that people will be able to kind of like to enter it. The same as you have, in fact, physical kind of like, entrance with a badge in the company, you have to have the same thing into your IT systems. So it's just like, it's a shift of the analog world to the digital world, and now AI and Gen AI is just exponentially exposing that.
And very fast.
Yes, especially with Gen AI, because you have to build knowledge base to be able to kind of like be able to have the best performance. In terms of the result that you have and relevance, in fact, of the results of the prompt. So you need kind of like to make sure that you train through a RAG or fine-tuning those models, and therefore you need to use, in fact, this actual knowledge base. But more often, this knowledge base, and take SharePoint, I bet every company here have no labeling of documentation that you have, in fact, on the SharePoint. And that starts with that, because you might eventually have third-party confidential information where you sign an NDA, or you have, in fact, have this confidential information from a customer. You don't want to kind of like have the LLM, to be exposed to this information. So you need to be able to have the right labeling. So the data governance is still a basis, for you to be able to do proper AI and Gen AI. So, and that's what makes it, in fact, is exciting, but but at the same time challenging.
Without data, no AI.
There's nothing without data.
I want to take it a little bit to a different angle, and I think it's something we discussed extensively in our preparation. It's the definition of value. So we discussed now mainly what are the risks and how to handle the risk and also put it into perspective of innovation. But it's of course also a balancing act towards value. And value is something easily translated into a product, but value on itself, for example, for AI governance or data governance, is difficult to really define. How do you handle that within NXP?
I think that for me is you don't have kind of like put value on AI governance or data governance. These are enablers, okay, to an to a bigger kind of like picture, and the bigger picture for me is digital transformation. So if, for example, today we want to go and be able to be more productive in our software coding for our software engineers using Gen AI, well, in fact, there's in fact productivity gain. And productivity gain is not in fact for cost savings or to fire people, but basically because it's the time to market. We are in a competitive market, and therefore is that faster we have in fact is our product on the market, the better it is. So whatever in fact efficiency we can gain, it's better. So you have to have first the NXP priorities. Where are we in terms as a company? Where can we compete? Where can we kind of like can gain market share or others? And therefore this is in fact what will define the actual use cases, and those use cases will deliver in fact the value. This is why when we have created the AI governance and the AI advisory council, we didn't have only the risks, which in fact most often people look only at the risks. So we need to have in fact the actual balance between risks and value, because sometimes you have to move the needle of your risks to the value part, because it says, okay, if you don't take risk, there's no innovation. If you don't take risk, you kind of like can take in fact market shares. So you have to define how far you can go within the regulation, within the compliance that you have. So I think that the value is all about kind of like, how can you kind of like get more revenue? How kind of like can get in fact more operational efficiency? But more and more, how kind of like have in fact is the best decision making? I think that's the BCG that have done in fact is a study, I think it was a few years ago, and that the actual top performing company, have taken better decision than in fact other companies. And there are now all these actual tools, and we talk about value, I kind of like, the first thing I ask whenever there's any use case, who's the actual business owner? Because if the business owner wants to do only a POC to play with Gen AI or AI, I stop it. And in my previous company, I have put in fact is a number. They had to pay 5,000 euros. It's not a very big deal, just for a POC. The number of POC has dropped by 80%.
So that's how you handle the pilot syndrome.
That's the pilot syndrome, because in fact I arrived in fact at NXP, the number of POC we had in AI is a lot, because we have launched a citizen data science program, which in fact was fantastic, but we had so many POCs, but never kind of like, went to MVP or even scale. And we know that in fact for you to capture the value and the impact is when you scale. You don't scale, you don't have value. And here's the same thing that we have to pay attention that in fact people need to, it's just why you're building that use case. What is it for? And this is where the Canva, I like it very much, because it makes you think about these different steps, not in fact of what type of the model I want to build, but what is it for?
AI, yay.
What is it for? What are you going to kind of like gain from it? So I think it's important that that's what we have done as well within NXP, is that we have built this actual 3 years roadmap in kind of like all the different domains that tell us is where do we want to bring AI and Gen AI and digital transformation moving forward, and focusing 2025 on 10 or 12 use cases per domain that in fact we can deliver, and that in fact is not have in fact just a cost element to it, but as well in fact as a value element to it.
We already need to bring it to a closing.
Yes.
And I told you that I will only ask you the questions that we prepared.
No worries.
But
you can have an extra one.
Here is a new
I can
question.
hear it.
Just on a personal level, I'm very curious, if you look to your journey now at NXP, what is something that happened at NXP? It can be something small, it can be something big, that really you thought, this is so exciting that I'm here at this moment right now.
I think it is when our CEO lately kind of like was looking at the market and preparing for 2025. And when we saw, I mean, we are number one in the automobile industry. We all have heard that there's profit warning, in fact, in the automobile industry. And therefore, you need kind of like is to make sure that, in fact, to continue to compete, you need to kind of like to go and continue to perform. But we have in our part of the strategy and our exco kind of like is perform and transform. And he says that we need to kind of like find room, okay, for transform in 2025 and the years to come. And that for me is kind of like fantastic because often people think of AI or Gen AI more in terms of the technology, but not in terms of how you can transform organization. And at some stage is for us, and I see it in fact is from an NXP at my level, is that if we don't transform, we don't exist tomorrow. And we all kind of like know the Kodak story. And there's in fact many out there. So if you want to survive, you have to adopt and you have to embed AI and Gen AI at every level within the guardrails, with responsible AI and all have you, but you have to kind of like to be able to go and focus where are you going to make a difference. So you need to have this actual POC, MVP, scale mindset. You need to have an agile way of working. And that's in fact is the moment where it says, okay, we understood. And he was using some of the actual terms or sentences that I have used in the past when I did presentation to the MT management team. And that's in fact is where was the moment, is that perform and transform, you all have to go and keep it. It's at every level of the organization, even when you're developing AI and Gen AI use cases.
Great. So that was the moment where you thought, okay, we are on the right track.
Yes, I'm in the right company.
Great, great. Let's open for some more questions from the audience. Please raise your hand. And indeed wait for the microphone before it's there. Here on the front row. Good catch.
Yeah, thank you for the nice talk first. So you know, the computing started at the size of a room, then we had the desktops, and like as you said, now we have the computing power in our watches even. So, and it's like edge AI. So NXP is really strong in edge computation. So I'm wondering, what is your opinion on how generative AI on edge will transform the businesses or the people?
I think, I mean, if you transform businesses, you transform people by definition. So I think that, we had Tiny ML already, in fact, being built on our, product. And I think that you'll find, tiny Gen AI or tiny LLMs kind of like moving forward on the edge. So that's, in fact, is the aim. But I'm not kind of like too much into our product details, kind of like to go and tell you. And even if I knew, I couldn't tell you.
Here's the next question. Yeah, over there.
You mentioned the AI Governance Council and how you review the use cases. So I was wondering, when you go through that process, of course you look at the risks, and I don't only mean the ethical aspects, but there are risks associated. Do you do that assessment only on use case basis or the impact on the overall portfolio?
On both. I mean, we kind of like, we start with the use case, and the risk that we look into it is the privacy component, because people always kind of like talk about AI and the EU AI Act, but we don't have to forget that the GDPR is still kind of like very relevant, and therefore privacy is still very important. And there's many other kind of like, policy that we have to go and follow. The second aspect that we look at it, and this is very important for us because we're in the semiconductor industry, is compliance, because of trade control. So what in fact, we cannot do, certain things, in Europe or in the US, and kind of like we are working in China, we are working in Asia. So we have in fact to be careful as well from the compliance perspective. We have to kind of like be careful as well of all the rest, in fact, of the cybersecurity, the security component, the IP component, the legal component, the commercial terms and conditions that in fact we have, and therefore who in fact are the users who are going to go and do it, and what is it the purpose for? So for example, is if you develop a piece of code, okay, and that piece of code, cannot be patented or IP'd moving forward, how can you kind of like have a Gen AI piece of code that's going to kind of like to be copyrighted or can be IP'd whenever you kind of like give it to one of our customers? So all these different type of questions is being looked at, moving forward.
Thank you.
Check. Yeah.
Works.
Thanks for your insights. I just want to get your sense on unpacking the AI transformation. and you can transform at individual levels of processes. But can you paint a picture of what an AI transformed organization, what it means to you?
I think that I hinted to it to a certain extent. I think that for me is that an AI transformed organization is that when you're going to go slowly but surely kind of like to autonomous enterprise. And therefore, what I mean by autonomous enterprise is how you kind of like can build on AI, BI, Gen AI, okay, and therefore and you can even kind of like look at process mining. And when you look at that is where and how can we kind of like augment our decision making. And you kind of like have more and more intelligent decision platform they're going to be available for you to go on. Because what in fact do we do in companies? We take decisions. A decision kind of like is followed by an action. An action in fact is delivering in fact as a result. But for you to take a decision, as I said, is that this is in fact where many companies are performing better than others because they kind of like take better decisions. And they take decision on input or insights. And all, in fact, what AI and BI and Gen AI are delivering is insights. And therefore, if you kind of like can accelerate that or automate that in certain aspect, that's in fact, you bring in fact the efficiency into it. So that's in fact where I think is an AI-driven organization is in fact we're going to go and move more in terms of this actual autonomous. Are we going to be kind of like, be replaced by robots or what have you? That's in fact for the films and for Hollywood. Or I will be retired by then.
Future music. Anyone else a question? Over there, on the front row.
Hello. I have a question about, you just mentioned to go to transformative and performative in terms of the chipset market in mobility and vehicles, right? And I'm wondering what your strategy is going to be on like fully autonomous driving. And the reason that I have this question because I used one of your top-of-the-line chipsets, the IMX93, which had an MPU on board, which can be used for a nice AI task. But if you go like fully driverless cars, you've seen the Teslas where you can play AAA games on the screen, right? That's not the performance that you can push out of that chipset. Do you have a product line coming up where you can do fully autonomous driving using these very serious AI chips?
We might have, as I said, in fact, if we have, I will not be able to answer. No, I think that, as I said from the beginning in my introduction, I don't kind of like look at the R&D side and on the product side, in fact, of NXP. I really look, in fact, at the other part of the NXP. So that means, in fact, we develop AI or ML or Gen AI for our R&D people to go and do a better design or faster design or more robust design or build, in fact, with them, for example, digital twin. But I'm not, in fact, in the strategy of the product itself, which, in fact, is a different department. So I won't be able to kind of like answer you. But if I know the answers, I'll send you, in fact, a message because I'm interested because I drive a Tesla.
Oh, that would be amazing.
One last question. Over here. 2 microphones coming up.
Sorry, so Andrew, so I work at RBN, so a lot of what you've talked about, we've had similar experiences. We didn't use a 5K threshold, but we set an amount of use cases per domain. I'm wondering how you addressed not having every domain and use case recreating the same capability. So summarization, for example, or RAG, talk to your documents. How have you addressed that sort of waste and still spreading best practices?
That's being done, in fact, mainly through our digital transformation program, where basically, in fact, is that my team in each of the domains, we have a data lead, and we kind of like make sure that, in fact, all the artifacts are being documented, plus with the help of MLOps, we kind of like make sure that we have a central registry as well of every artifact that's being built. And we use a lot, for example, from a data perspective, data products. So we have a central marketplace where, in fact, data scientists kind of like can find, all the relevant information. And now we're kind of like doing the same thing for the models. But it's more the collaborative approach that, in fact, you need. So, you can have lots of tools and marketplaces. At the end of the day, it's kind of like people still need to talk with each other. And this is where the community of practice becomes very important because we have that on a monthly basis for data engineers, data scientists, and they kind of like, share between themselves what they have done so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. So it's a different level. But it's mainly kind of like is making sure that, in fact, the information is available and is being kind of like tracked and safeguarded for people to be able to access to it.
So not only creating tools, but also changing the culture.
Yeah, I think that in any transformation, people kind of like think about digital transformation only at the digital component, but transformation is about people, and we all know how difficult it is to change our habits.
That's a good last sentence. Thank you so much. Give them a warm
Thank you.
applause.
Thank you. Thank you.